I definitely have got the last session of the day. I think everyone should just stand up for a second. Stand up, stand up, stand up. Just give yourselves a bit of a stretch. Stretch out. Now, I wanted you to put one hand in the air if you can name for me a well-known New Zealand invention. Anyone? Okay, at the front here. The electric fence. The Hamilton jet in stereo. Pavlova, controversial call here, but this is not the Australian Business Summit, so we're okay. The motorcycle, yes, very good. Bungee jumping. The which one? Earthquake sliders, that's getting obscure, but good, thank you. Pardon? Xeno pet food, very good. Very good, okay, you can all sit down now, thank you very much. And the reason I asked that is because we recently at New Zealand Story went out and asked a lot of insights from Chinese consumers and businesses about New Zealand. And at New Zealand Story Group, if you haven't heard of us, our job, as Tim said, is to tell the story of New Zealand to the world and help the world understand our New Zealand story. Because there's more to it than just the widgets and the gadgets and the cool things, but actually our job is to try and expand people's understanding. And I understand today that you've spoken a few times about the brand of New Zealand and making sure we tell our story well. So part of our job is to tell our story well. The story of New Zealand is very deep and rich, and it talks about the values of the people that live here. Things like New Zealand being the first place in the world where women could vote, the first country, the country that invented the 40-hour working week, the country that has thought differently about the ecology and about how we protect the environment. And these are the sorts of stories that we started to really want to get across, because they talk about a deeper truth about who we are, a deeper meaning. Now, recently I heard a good statistic that if you wanted people to think you're intelligent at a conference, you should either talk about China, which you've already been doing all day, or artificial intelligence. So I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence. So I took all of those stories and some of the stories that you mentioned, and I fed them into ChatGPT, and I asked them to draw a picture of New Zealand. And here it is. This is New Zealand's contribution to the world according to artificial intelligence. You can see there women voting, you can see there people striking to get better pay deals, and somewhat randomly carrots. Because New Zealand is also the place where we grow the most carrot seeds of any country in the world, including sending them to China. But the sort of stories that we're starting to know really resonate with consumers, and I'll get to the research in a minute, are the stories where they are surprising and yet they tell a deeper story about New Zealand. So New Zealand, and pertinent to the last panel that was just on, is one of the largest airspace countries in the world. We control an enormous amount of the planet's airspace, which is why an idea like the Southern Link might be such a good one. 6% of the world's airspace. So that's a nice surprising topic, but it leads you into another discussion then of what do we do with that airspace, and the fact that now New Zealand is, as many of you in the room will know, the fourth most prolific country in the world to launch rockets. And that is ChatGPT's version of a rocket launching from New Zealand, by the way. We are not ruining Mitre Peak by putting the spaceship Columbia out there. But this is a sort of interesting statistic that when you get it in front of a consumer, they start to think differently about the country. They know us for one or two things, but if we can expand their knowledge into other things, they start to see us as a country with a set of values that they can align to. Not just a set of individual widgets or gadgets. And the values of New Zealand that we talk about at New Zealand Story are these four values underpinning this core topic of New Zealand being a country that cares for people and place. And that idea of caring is what drives ingenuity for New Zealand. And then you can start to draw a line between many of the things that you all mentioned as well, the earthquake, seismic isolating devices, for example, about care for people in a place where the earth shakes a lot. And so these four values are the things that we really lean into when we talk to consumers, trying to understand, do they know this about us? Not just do they know where we are on a map. Now, does this sort of thing matter? Before I even show you what the research is. Well, we know that country brands are one of the most valuable assets that any country could have on its virtual balance sheet. You know, country brands attract foreign investment, they attract tourism, other sorts of talent, they help make our products more desirable. By one measure, about 25 to 26% of the value of goods and services and trade comes from the brand of the country that they come from. Think about chocolate. Would you pay more for a bar of chocolate from Estonia or from Switzerland? Estonia, someone said at the front there. Switzerland's some good chocolate. But my point is, country brands do make a difference. And New Zealand's brand is worth about $250 billion US. A significant value for the country, right up there with some of the biggest tech brands in the world. So by leveraging the brand of New Zealand and by understanding how to unlock that brand, we can learn more about ourselves. Now, one of the things, as I mentioned, we do a lot of research. And over the last few months, we've been researching the Chinese consumers and understanding what do they think about themselves at the moment? How is China seeing itself as a consumers? And you can see there, this is a country where they think of themselves as successful, as relevant, as advanced. And those who have been to China in the last year or so, it's a really palpable thing, the sense of country pride, of wearing Chinese brands, driving BYD cars. That's a change from probably 5 or 6 years ago. But they also see themselves in some ways as divided. And that is an interesting statistic as well that's coming through. So that's kind of where China is coming from now, is the sense of self-assurance that's coming through. Now, when we did our research, we asked them for perceptions across multiple factors there. And I've just because it's late in the day, I don't want to put you all to sleep. But there are different things that drive perception. The one on the far left, the thing called the Global Soft Power Index, is basically how relevant does this country see us as having influence in the world with soft power. And many of you will know sort of soft power. Soft power is the idea of countries can have influence in the world without having a military force, for example. So New Zealand globally is seen as having quite a mid-tier soft power in the mid-20s, but China sees us as more than that. And you can see there that our reputation is also fairly high. But then there's some areas where we fall right off when compared to the rest of the world, things like our science and our technology. And if I point those out there, we're not seen, for example, as being highly influential, and we're not necessarily seen as being strong in education and science. These are our opportunity areas because we've actually got really good stories to tell, going back to my point about being a space nation. And what we realise is the more the country knows about us, the more these factors lift, the higher impact we have, the higher our brand is worth. So if we compare China for example, to Australia, you can see that Australia has very high regard for New Zealand when it comes to things like how influential we are, our peace, our prosperity, our news and communications even, and that leads to a higher value for New Zealand in Australia. So our job collectively to do is to grow New Zealand's brand by growing some of those metrics that people in China might not necessarily know about us, because it will help us gather more from our foods, products and services. So we're perceived in China as being collectivist, progressing and caring. These are good things in China. Yes, we're seen as small and remote, but that's often seen in a positive sense. We're seen as having bountiful, beautiful natural beauty, unproblematic, progressive, but at times laid back as well. And so this is part of our challenge. And Liz mentioned earlier that sometimes when you turn up in a country, you've got to turn up as your authentic self, but you probably have to just maybe represent a version of yourself that market is expecting. So progressive and uncomplicated is fantastic, but laid back sometimes is not. And New Zealand is perceived, if we look at these metrics here, and I'm going quickly through this research, I know, but these are sorts of, as I mentioned, the things that influence how countries are perceived. Are they seen as powerful and mighty? Are they seen as driving a kind of conversation that is relevant for the world? Do they transform our daily lives? And frankly, on those metrics, New Zealand is not seen as credible as we could be. But the reality is, on the ones where we do have a great story, we are seen as highly credible. And in the research, we asked people, when we concentrate on these two factors here, but is New Zealand a country that acts on humanity's behalf? Do you see us as credible as working for people? We were seen as highly relevant. And similarly, caretaking planet Earth. Do you see us as a country who has deep care for the planet? And again, we're seen as highly relevant and highly credible in those areas. So this is our kind of opportunity area to grow from these existing perceptions and start telling people more about those dimensions where we are highly credible. So, for example, we told people when we did this research some of the stories of New Zealand's innovation, unprompted. We said, if I told you a story about a country that is highly advanced in the space industry, what would you think? These are the things that surprise and delight and grow consumers' perceptions of New Zealand. So things like, for example, any story that fits into this idea of care for people and connection to place is something that helps grow our global perceptions. So this is the work that we're doing at New Zealand Story, is trying to understand more deeply about, it's not just saying, we've got nice food, it's about saying things like, well, actually the reason we have nice food is because we care for the planet that we're from, and we care for the environment that we look after. And from that, we create great science, technology, and innovation. And if we do that well, and I'm wrapping up because I know Tim wants to ask a few questions, if we do that well, ChatGPT says that we'll end up with a society where many Chinese people admire New Zealand for the many things that we have to offer. So, Moderator, thank you very much. This research, by the way, I should mention, much deeper version of it with a lot more data, etc., is available on the New Zealand Story website. We have a toolkit there you can download all our research insights from. It goes into lots of perceptions by markets, by sector groups, etc. So thank you very much, and we'll ask a few questions. Tim, kia ora.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Could you go back to that slide, if you can go back to that?
The utopian slide.
The one, those aeroplanes in the harbour, right?
Yeah, well, apparently Auckland Airport's not big enough, so they're landing them there now.
Yeah, great, brilliant. And 2 sky towers, at least they can count. Yeah, cool. A couple of questions have come through. The first, I think you answered, where can we get the research that you presented? That's through the
where do we get the research from?
Where can people download
through the
that?
New Zealand Story website, yes. And we work with multiple research partners to provide this, so this is not just reckons. This is, it starts with a very high-level survey instrument that does literally hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and then from that we do a qualitative survey where we have panels of people around in different markets that we drill into.
Yeah, and that can be downloaded from the New Zealand Story
website. That's right.
Another question here, do other countries care about their own brand?
Absolutely. New Zealand is one of a cluster of countries that has an organisation like ours, New Zealand Story. Sweden, for example, Estonia, I just mentioned them earlier. Not sure about the quality of their chocolate, I can't attest to that actually. Costa Rica, but there are actually dozens of countries, and because they know that having a strong country brand is really important for them, so it's not an unusual thing to do.
Cool. And final question just from me. I know that New Zealand Story is quite involved in the Prime Minister's trade missions, and also any potential inward visits that might be happening over the course of the next year or so. What are we doing to make sure that we are portraying New Zealand in the best light for both of those scenarios?
Is the question, are we going to have a lot of fireworks?
Fireworks have been mentioned today. Yeah,
For those of us that are just looking at Fran, because on the recent mission we were just on, we were absolutely blown away by the quality of the welcomes that we received. I guess my point is we've got to be authentic in the way that we welcome visitors, and New Zealand's manaakitanga and our way of welcoming is a little bit different than the rest of the world. I mean, we have to provide high quality, we have to provide an authentic experience, but we need to do it in an authentically New Zealand way. So I'm not sure, for example, that putting up a whole lot of fireworks is really an authentic New Zealand thing. But we should absolutely welcome with the best of our food, our wine, our entertainment, and that sort of thing. So yes, New Zealand, we're working with the rest of the government agencies on how we kind of continuously lift the game on how we do things like that.
Brilliant. Well, I think you've proven why you're given this fantastic last spot of the conference. So could you all give David Downs a huge round of applause?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.